Well, there's no doubt that climate change is a very serious problem, both in itself for the effects it has on infrastructure and so on, but also for health. And we know that there are going to be health effects due to climate change. But the centre really takes a positive stance and an optimistic stance here because it's not all bad news, because we know that some of the things that we need to do to tackle climate change and to address the health impacts will have significant positive net benefits for our health. And the role of the centre is to try and draw that out so that the narrative isn't just all doom and gloom about the problems, the economic cost, and the health, the disadvantages of climate change and the difficulty of doing something about it. But it also has we have a balanced discussion about the things which will make a difference and which will be positive. I think there are two things which the centre will do which are really important. The first is to place health center stage in terms of discussions about climate change, because there's a danger that it all just seems like it's all about money, that climate change is going to cost us money and we'll need to spend money to stop it. But it's not, of course. And climate change, we have to do something about climate change to maintain, protect, and improve our health. And the second thing is to try and turn the discussion around so that there is more optimism about the fact that these things, it's not that we can't afford to do what's necessary, so we can't afford not to do what's necessary, because unless we adopt low carbon approaches, unless we design the future to be more climate resilient, yeah, we will have a terrible time. You know, there will be just all kinds of costs that are required to clean up the mess, and there will be significant health impacts. So those two things, putting health at the center of the discussion around climate, or alongside other things, of course, and taking a more positive view to try and emphasize the potential benefits of doing this, so that and that will be very, very important for bringing the public with us in these debates. It's just very clear that the people who are most affected by climate change in terms of their health will be the more disadvantaged groups who are less able to mitigate the impacts of climate change, who have less agency and less freedom to adopt the approaches which will protect them. So it is very important for us to understand that better, both through developing new evidence, because there isn't, although we know quite a lot, there are some big gaps in the evidence base which we need to fill. But also we need to, and we're getting on more into the policy side of this, but that there are some clear things we need to do to work across different sectors, to work with communities themselves, to try and understand how change can be made in a positive way that will protect people from the changes of for the likely changes in climate. The policy panel has three functions. The first is to work with the centre to ensure that any research that's done by the centre is highly relevant to policy. So some element of prioritising the research that's done by the centre and with collaborators. The second thing is to make sure that the research which is done has the best possible impact in terms of policy, because I mean it's so important that anybody doing research doesn't just stop with producing the research. It's of no value unless it has some impact in policy terms and in terms of practice as well. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is a bit more subtle, but there are ways in which the panel can advise the centre on how to have more impact through policy engagement. So not necessarily just through research outputs, which have a particular role in terms of policy development, but engaging with policymakers so that the way of thinking that we're developing in the centre can be can enter into the thinking of people in different spheres, so that we can try and have influence that way, a sort of softer influence. So those are the three roles. Well, my hope for the policy panel is that we can really ensure that the centre has the maximum possible benefit as quickly as possible. And we're going to do that by helping our colleagues, the researchers, to really focus on the things which are current policy priorities, so that the questions that people have in government and in other areas and other sectors can be picked up as early as possible, so that the centre has the opportunity to help people answer those questions using the best possible evidence, and when necessary, develop new evidence as quickly as possible to fill that gap. Because otherwise, there is going to be a huge missed opportunity to try and influence the policy which is being developed right now, so that it's based on the best evidence and has the best positive net impact on health. The culture of the centre is very important, and my reading of this is that the way the centre is being developed is to ensure that it doesn't just operate in the university sector, that it operates across sectors, playing the obviously very important role of academics in generating and understanding and translating research, but that it's just the centre is part of a network, is well engaged with other areas, so that it can be of maximum benefit. So that it isn't because it's I think we've learned this from the COVID pandemic, perhaps, that it's so important that the people who are using research to make important decisions, whether that's about resources or policy or even legislation, that they understand and appreciate the strengths and weaknesses of the evidence, and that there's a good dialogue and opportunity to discuss between academics and policymakers. And if we can achieve that, that will be a huge positive. And I understand that is the culture of the centre. It's not an isolated academic exercise. It's an exercise which is, yes, it's taking place in universities, but with partners, but it's embedded in the country's response to climate change. When looking at climate change and the health effects of climate change, the time is really not on our side. We have to move very fast, because whenever we look at the evidence, we can see that things are moving ahead. And so I think the key thing, and that's where the policy panel can help, is that we have not got time to waste looking at the wrong questions, the wrong research questions, and then find out later and then go back and do things differently. We've got to get the question right first time, because if you don't do that, then you are going to lose time. So I think it's important to move as quickly as possible, but at the same time, high quality research is not quick. I mean, it does take time to collect data reliably, to process it, and to report the results. So we can't do. There is a certain amount of time required to produce key evidence, but we have to make sure that we get the design right first time, so that when we do get the results, they are the results which policymakers can use. The centre is about the health effects of climate change and how we can maximise the health benefits of the response to climate change. And it might be worth unpacking that a little bit. So we know the main effects that climate change has on health are due to heat. So periods of sustained high temperature have very significant impacts. Extreme events, so flooding, very strong winds can cause accidents and affect people's health directly. Flooding, in fact, has a lot of long-term effects on people's mental health. And we know that from research that's been done by some of our colleagues. So extreme events are important. There are certain infections which, as the temperature rises, will become a bit more prevalent. Some of those infections, which we think of as tropical diseases, might become common in the UK. So we need to think about those. And then there are some rather subtle effects on our diet and nutrition. So the way food grows and the availability and security of our food might be very important. And indeed, the nutritional content of food will change as the climate changes. And then finally, there are direct effects of climate change on health and care services. So we know that in times of extreme weather or heat wave, it's more difficult for the NHS and for social care providers to look after vulnerable people. And so that's another area where we have to really look at what we can do to mitigate and to adapt to the likely changes in climate. So those are the broad areas of health which are affected, and all of them are susceptible to this model of thinking first about positive benefits and how by addressing climate change and by adapting to the changes which are going to happen, we can have a net positive benefit in terms of people's health.